Welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. Boomer. Some people don't like the term, but I think, like many other words, it's all in how you say it. My umbrella business is Boom with a Bang, and I think we should keep that in mind as much as possible. We Boomer women don't have a lot of role models as we traverse this chapter, so the goal of this podcast is to introduce you to guests who might incentivize, encourage, teach you to embrace your wisdom, our wisdom. With this incarnation of the Boomer Woman's Podcast, I'm interviewing people who have a message of interest for our demographic. If you want to hear about or learn about something specific, let me know and I'll find someone who understands us to talk about it. There's a contact page at boomwithabang.com. If you want to be a guest on podcast or know someone who would be a great guest, message me. Finally, this show is all about conversation. We women know its value, we know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. Do you ever read someone's bio and think, holy crap, how did they fit all that into one life? And look at them, they've barely reached middle age. Do you ever read someone's bio and think, yeah, I'd love to say I did, but I know I don't have the wherewithal to do. Those two sentences, I think, about sum up my guest today. Although, let me add a few details from her LinkedIn profile. Book author, international policy expert, bank supervision consultant, advisor to the governor of the central bank. And before we get to her story, may I also add Kosovo, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Moscow, Afghanistan, Southern Sudan, Rwanda, Cambodia, and this list could go on. Jamie Bowman, welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast.
You're very generous, Agnes. You made me blush here.
Oh, you're safe. The video won't show, I promise. Jamie, everyone knows I come with notes, and today, just introducing you took a whole page. Can we start by finding out just who Jamie Bowman is and how she came to what most of us would say is an extraordinary life?
Well, I think everybody with an extraordinary life, if I have one, what do you want to say? Most people stumble into it just like I did. I was an attorney. I worked for the federal government for a while, regulating thrift institutions. And then when I wanted to leave the government, I went in-house counsel at a really fine mortgage company in Southern California. And over a matter of months, our fine company went from extending mortgage loans that built family wealth, and we ended up doing subprime loans. And that was basically using your home equity as an ATM machine. So we were now funding things like breast augmentations, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and all those other equity loans that fueled the subprime crisis that came to head in 2007. Well, in 2000, I didn't like it. I didn't like the loans we were making. I didn't like the way we were getting brokered loans. It just wasn't my thing. But in Southern California, that's the only job I could get because everybody else was involved in the same loans. And I was looked at as someone who just didn't understand the economics. And someone said, if you'd gone to Harvard, you'd understand this, which hurt my feelings. So looking for a new job, I stumbled on the international work, and there's a few websites that you can go to and you can find different types of projects. And by incredible luck, at the same time, the World Bank and USAID, the big donors around the world, were looking for people who knew how to write mortgage laws and teach people in the central banks how they worked and where the pitfalls were. And since I'd been in subprime, I knew them all. So that sort of got me out of Southern California and then into the international development market. And I wasn't exclusively in mortgages. Once you get on site, they ask you to do everything and anything, write up proposals, help with contracts. So I was a lawyer, but my client was now the Ministry of Finance of Bangladesh, or it was the new assembly in Kosovo, or it was the Ministry of Justice in Armenia. So it turned out it was really exciting, but it was still a job. It wasn't like I was sat at a desk every day. I mean, when I apply for jobs now in the US, they go, do you come to the office? I mean, are you able to sit at a desk? And yes, that's what I did for the last 20 years. It was just in a different country. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, it's interesting because, I've done my research. Do you want me to tell you all about you? No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, tell me, as long as it's good.
And, I'm going like, this woman goes to two smallish West Coast universities. And then I looked into...
It's not a smallish West Coast university. Berkeley's a big... My first class at Berkeley was 2,000 people. Had 2,000 people in Economics 101. So Berkeley was big, but my law school was small.
Okay, well, I guess, and that's where I sort of went, I guess maybe because I'm used to the name of Berkeley, that I never, you always think of like, Harvard and all those bigger East Coast universities as sort of the big ones. So I do apologize.
Get complaints from Cal Bears.
Okay, and I apologize right up front.
We'll walk that back.
Just whack me upside the head.
No worries, no worries.
Okay, so you went from one smallish, one amazing West Coast university, and then a smallish.
Right.
But U of the Pacific McGeorge School of Law states that they actually prepare lawyers to practice locally and globally. I was thinking that was the link, but...
No, they didn't teach me how to practice globally. In fact, at the time, when I went to law school, I was dating a man who's going to Harvard Business School, and Harvard did not offer any international or global business courses. That's how rapidly this whole globalization came around. I mean, we were just starting to think in terms of working in other places. I got a good education in McGeorge, but I had a good basic law school education, and that gave me the confidence that I could do what I did. Or maybe I was just naive. That might be, or stupid. It might be one.
Okay, and please, you forgive me now, but I am also, we're children of the 70s. It's like naivety reigns supreme. We could do anything. So
right. Or maybe I'm just missing that part of it. In the beginning, of course, I went to places like Kosovo, which wasn't too dangerous. Ukraine was not dangerous at the time. Bangladesh, I did get attacked. And that was a real eye-opener for me because as I explained in that chapter, everybody had warned me, but I didn't take it seriously. People were so friendly and they were so welcoming. I never took it seriously as I should have. And then I learned my lesson the hard way. And that stayed with me a long time. Yeah. When you're physically attacked, and I was just grabbed, so it wasn't so dangerous, but it stayed with me probably for the rest of my career.
So several thoughts come to mind here. And first of all, I read that great long list, and it was only part of your list of countries. Mm-hmm. But for as long as I can remember, most of them have been political hotspots, where war and carnage were all in a day's work. So how many of those countries were you in at points in time where like you may have feared for your life, perhaps?
I hope you're not pinning that upheaval on me. There's no connection between me being in country and political upheaval.
You tell us the truth here, Jamie. This is truth or dare. Truth or dare.
Just in the Bangladesh chapter, I mentioned this, that I read up on it. I was willing to go. I looked at the guidebooks, and the guidebooks didn't talk about anything, didn't mention any kind of danger to foreigners. But the guidebook had been printed before 9/11. And after 9/11, things changed dramatically around the world. Okay. And Bangladesh became much more radical. When I was in Ukraine, they had just declared their independence from Russia. And when you talk to Russians, they were saying, no, they're not independent. This is like a phase. It was like a child growing up, and they would come back. And it was very predictable if you listen to what the Russians have been saying for years. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but it's true. They've never felt that Ukraine could be separated from Russia. It's part of it. I did go to dangerous places in Afghanistan, but the first time I was there, it was 2005. And as the title explains, I actually rode a bike around downtown Kabul once because I'm a very bad bike rider. I never did it again, but I could walk. I had to be careful, but I was able to walk through the markets with my boyfriend. So it wasn't that dangerous at the time. In 2010, it was completely different. That's for sure.
I will just mention to our audience here that sometimes what you're saying might sound a little cryptic. You have written a book, which we will get to later.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's great. It's just people are going to say, like, what are you talking about? No, this is great. As I say, we're going to get to the book, but right now I am so interested in the life you have led to date. So you're a woman lawyer.
Correct.
How often was being a professional of your gender an issue in these countries?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's an advantage. When you go to the Muslim countries, you're sort of a third sex. You're not male, you're not female in the way that they treat females. Yeah. They treat you differently. And I took full advantage to that. But there would be times where the Islamic men would not shake my hand. That haram, it was forbidden. But for the most part, this new generation that I met in Iraq and Afghanistan, well, more Iraq than Afghanistan, are TV watchers. They watch American films. They were able to tease me. Their English was good enough that they could tease me. But I never really had the gender issue, except when I was walking down the street in Kabul. And this was in 2005, and I had a long skirt on. I had a long sleeve T-shirt on. My head was covered. So I attempted to look modest. And even if I didn't fit in to as local women did, I hope that they understood that I was respecting their culture. Okay. Well, as we walked down the street, cars stopped. And men shook their fists at me and screamed at me. And my boyfriend kept saying, oh, they're saying, welcome to Afghanistan, which they were not. They were clearly furious with me. And a woman came up and she pulled up her skirt a little bit and she showed these frilly pantaloons like Scarlett O'Hara would have worn. Okay. And if to wear a skirt, I had to make sure I had the right underwear. And so that's why they were so mad, because they could see a flash of ankle when I walked.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, this is interesting because even, just taking it into a strictly women thing now in terms of the clothing is how much research would you have to do? Because it seems to me that, you think of the outer appearance and you think, okay, like I've done this, I've done that, I'm trying to respect. And how do you know about long-legged pantaloons?
I never did. I never buckled under that. I was in a pretty modern ministry, and they drove me to work. So I was only on the street one or two more times, and the other times I wore pants. And it was in a pretty modern, pretty enclave where there were a lot of foreigners. So, but I was careful.
Yeah. Were you ever downright scared?
When I was attacked or grabbed in Bangladesh, that scared me to the point where I actually shook. That bothered me. I was scared in Afghanistan because where I lived was close enough to the U.S. Embassy that when the insurgents shot a mortar or a rocket aiming for the U.S. Embassy, it would sometimes fly over and land near where I lived. And let's see, then when I was in southern Sudan and I lived in a tent because they didn't have the buildings, there was a camp made out of recycled safari tents. And I lived in a tent for 18 months. And an ammo dump went off. Some soldiers were moving some ammunitions and they were careless and they exploded. And so we had rockets, and I was only in a soft-sided tent. There was no place to take cover. That kind of bothered me. That stuck with me.
And as I said several minutes ago, where war and carnage are all in a day's work. Oh my goodness.
I think there are rules that you follow. You have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to understand what you're getting yourself into. You follow the instructions of the personal detail men who keep you safe. I am writing a sequel, and I talk about Iraq, which was very, very different. But at least in this book, for the most part, mothers would call me and they'd say, my son's going to Afghanistan as a consultant. I'm worried about him. It's like, if he follows the rules, he'll be fine. But that's not to say that a lot of, outside of the embassy where I was, a lot of people, Americans did get killed. A lot of foreigners got killed. Fortunately, I wasn't one of them.
Yeah. And just to, I need to know, like we see in all the movies, you were wearing 5-inch stilettos the whole time, right?
No, but some women did.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh my God. I thought I was joking.
Not me. I wore sensible shoes, low
Good for running.
Running, exactly. But yeah, there were some women who they felt that was important to their
look. You would have shown more than ankles in 5-inch stilettos. Oh my God. Okay, languages. How many languages have you learned, or did you at least partially learn?
None, because I spoke English, and most of the world wants to speak English. I remember being at a table in Kosovo, and so you had someone who was German, somebody was from Japan, somebody, they had nationalities all around the table, and everyone spoke English. There's a lot of times where if you deal with a minister, he will be able to understand what you say in English, but not feel comfortable speaking it. So I would have a translator. I did a lot of work through translators. And what you do is, first of all, you help them understand the terminology that you're going to use. I mean, you coach them on issues that they may not know. And then you ask them very politely that if you say something in English that is offensive in any way, they need to clean it up.
No, for sure.
Because you're not there to offend anybody. There have been a couple times I've said, this is meant to be offensive. Please say it in an offensive way. And they feel uncomfortable about it, but they'll do it. I mean, if you have a good translator, that's one reason why the U.S. Army is so adamant about getting the translators from Afghanistan and Iraq back to the United States, because they really were lifelines. They did all kinds of stuff for the troops there, and the promise was made to bring them back to the U.S. And that visa, for a long time, and I don't know what the status is now, is that visa program stalled. And there's I would walk down to the White House here in Washington, D.C., and there would be men in uniform, protesting the fact that these weren't being processed timely.
Yeah. And I'm in Canada, and the exact same thing happened where, so many of these people who had given everything for our Canadian troops and to help them out and to make sure that they were successful, and they get left behind. I mean, it's just, everything's wrong with that picture.
There are Canadians that do this as well. And I will say that, the U.S. has their own approach to international development. But when I worked with Canadians or the Canadian Embassy, somehow they always pick the jewel project. It's a nice size. It's manageable. They have the right people working on it. There is a start and there is a finish. There's good metrics. It's reasonable, and somehow it's like training teachers for a university, giving just really well thought through projects. So it's always nice to run across the Canadians when you're in country.
Oh, well, I was going to laugh and say, we just want to be liked.
You are liked because you do a good job.
Yeah, but we make sure we do pick the jobs we do well at. Yeah, and we always say sorry and thank you a lot. So, I mean, okay, I'm going to brighten up part of this mayhem and carnage. What was your favorite assignment, and why was it your favorite assignment?
Okay, well, this isn't very popular, I suppose, but after working in Micronesia, Kosovo, Kiev, Ukraine, Bangladesh, I got a job in Moscow for 6 months. And it was the first time I'd been in a real city in a long time. And Moscow is a magnificent city. It's up there with New York and Chicago and Berlin. It's got such history. And it was at a time, it was in 2004, where Putin really wasn't on the scene yet. He was there, but he wasn't the Putin that we know today. and they'd been crushed in the Olympics, so they were kind of broken. And I could walk freely around town. I could take the metro. On the weekends, I could go see Lenin's mummy. I could go to their, see the Fabergé eggs. It was really, their history is so amazing. I had some problems there, though. I was arrested on the street, and because my residence permit was 2 days out of date, through no fault of my own. And so they had me by my coat, and they were dragging me down the street, and they're like, "You're going to Moscow jail." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So I had counterparts, and I called up my assistant, and she's like, "Oh, Jamie, you have to get out of that. Some people do not come back from Moscow jail." And I'm like, so she talked to the officer, and they couldn't make a deal. So then she goes, "Call Alexei," who was my counterpart. He goes, "He's snowboarding in the mountains, but maybe he, as a man, can talk the officer into giving you a bribe or taking a bribe." So Alexei, to his credit, was snowboarding, and he answered his phone on the slopes. And I handed the phone to the officer. They talked back and forth, and then he hung up. He goes, "Okay, you're going to pay this." Okay, so I hung up the phone, and I expected to go like into a back alley or someplace small and clandestine to pay this bribe, which was really only about $10. And the officer's like, "So you pay or you not pay?" And I'm like, I'll pay. And I peeled off notes right there where everybody could see. It was clear that I was paying a bribe. And despite that, I still really enjoyed Moscow.
Oh my goodness. It's interesting that, as you say, you hear about this all the time, like the paid, bribes and stuff like that. But yeah, the last thing I would expect is, "Oh yeah, we're just in the middle of Red Square here, and here's all the tourists. Hello, hello, and here's all your bills peeling off of your wad in your pocket." Oh my goodness.
Red Square is amazing. I mean, it's like it's so vast. I remember watching it on TV as a kid, that grainy black and white, usually on PBS, they'd be showing Victory Day parades. And to be there, you're like, I never thought I would be in Moscow. Growing up, it was a Cold War. Yeah. And then to be there was really spectacular, at least for me.
Well, it's interesting too that, as you said, it was, if you look at New York or places like that, well, first of all, so many European and that continent cities are so much older than anything we've got here in North America. And I find that absolutely fascinating. But I take it you also mean that there's nightlife, there's excitement, there's, people milling about. Is there? Or
there was crazy nightlife in Afghanistan, but I never got to participate. I lived in the wrong place. But yeah, they had clubs, and you could buy alcohol. Afghans could not go into bars, so it would just be expats. There's a lot of really not my kind of nightlife in Moscow. But most places, you go out to dinner, you meet friends and that type of thing. I'm always very worried about getting into any kind of trouble in a country. Yeah. There are so many stories of nice young men meeting wonderful college girls at restaurants and bars, and then them being drugged and robbed. And then they have to explain to their firm why their computer is missing, because you can't just buy a computer or replace it because they have all the software. So there are a lot of there are too many stories about that, and that was just something I wanted to avoid.
Yeah.
Not that I was going to, be drugged, but I was careful.
Were you ever sort of looked at differently because of your international affiliations? In terms, it sounds like you were working at a fairly high level, and whether it's you, me, and Joe on the street, or whether it's somebody in a position of authority, they sort of look at you and go like, either, whoa, hands off because this person's too important, or how can we get this person into a corner and get information or something? See, I'm making your life even more clandestine than it may have been.
I'm not that important, for sure. But
you must have had knowledge.
He hadn't. In the big scheme of things, I'm sort of a dope, because, it's what I did was I was very focused on what they hired me for. I know there are other people who love to play the politics, but they didn't hire me for that. And I didn't want to take that on. So maybe I'm a little boring, but I don't play politics well. And so luckily I know that and I stay out of it.
Which is probably why today I'm interviewing Jamie Bowman and not Jamie Bond.
Bond, Jamie Bond.
001. Okay, I'm going to do a little
Go ahead.
No, okay. I was just going to say, I'm going to do a little sidestep here because this part of your life is actually something I've considered. Long hiking, such as the coast to coast in England and El Camino de Santiago in Spain. Tell us about that.
Well, it was sort of a pilgrimage for me because I had just finished a very tough job, and I encourage everybody to go. There was after the movie, well, I went before the movie The Way with Martin Sheen, and after that movie came out, everybody wanted to walk the El Camino. So we actually went before Easter, and some of the pensions were closed. So I mean, we had slim pickings, but we had a lot of the days by ourselves. There's a service you can hire and they take your luggage from place to place. And I think that's a nice way to go because then you're not carrying your, all the stuff that you don't need to have during the day. But it is spiritual. You take a train out and to get a pilgrim's passport, you have to walk 100 kilometers. Okay. So you start walking at dawn. I mean, you get off the train at dawn and you start walking and you walk 10, 17 kilometers, depending on the day. It's really neat. In the places where you stop to eat, they have pilgrim menus. And at the time it was €9 and you got a salad, an entree, a dessert, and a glass of wine. So it was really lovely. And after you walk every day, 15 miles a day, not, depends on the day. And you get into the cathedral and you're there in that open square. It's emotional because you're so tired. You've been outside. And even if you're not a believer, you just thank God you're there. And you go into the cathedral and there's a nun singing in a crystal clear voice. And if you haven't started crying already, that pushes you over. You meet people along the way. Everybody's there for a good reasons. Nobody is grumpy. Some people want to be left alone, but they're polite about it. You share chocolate bars. It's really a unique experience. And, I meet people all the time. I encourage them to get into shape. They recommend that you be able to walk, I think it's 12 miles back to back, 2 days back to back. I did that. I worked on that. I built up to it and I loved it. I really loved it. I was ready for it to be over when it was done. It was like, great. 5 days was just fine for me, but it's really a magical experience.
At the beginning, you said were you traveling with other people or were you by yourself?
Yes, I had a boyfriend. And if we talk about the book, he's in the book. In the book, his name is Roberto, and we met in Kosovo, and then we ping-ponged around the world on different projects. So we worked together in Kosovo, then we met up again in Afghanistan. He was supposed to come with me to South Sudan, but he got a better job in Dubai, and I lived in a tent. He lived in an air-conditioned high-rise. We got back together in Rwanda, and then we were together again the last time I was in Afghanistan. So he's the one that walked the El Camino with me.
Okay. One of the reasons I asked that was just that last year I interviewed a woman who she walked her first Camino at age 70 by herself.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it was like, holy crap. There's hope. There's hope for me yet.
There's some benefits for that because by the time I got to the end of the 100 kilometers, I think I had heard every story Roberto had to tell. It's like, it was, as long as you're fit, there were kids we met in the beginning and they were like, oh, we're going to walk it in 4 days. We'll see you suckers. And then, it turns out they blew out a knee or, they twisted an ankle. And there's just such precious parts of the El Camino. There, it's very rural and leafy and a lot of pastures you walk through. Did you do your research? You get your Pilgrim's Passport. It's really I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I did it. I talk about going back, but now I don't know if I'm up to it. You said she's 70. She was 70.
She was 70 when she did her first one.
Wow.
And I think she did a second one, a shorter one. So yeah, I mean, go for it.
Yeah.
Now I hadn't heard about the Coast to Coast. What was that one?
Okay, it's up in the north of England, right where it's the most narrow part of Britain. And I didn't do the whole thing. I started not halfway through, I cut off about a fourth because I didn't have enough time to do it.
Okay.
And that is amazing. If you're and I walked out alone, and it's leafy pastures, and it's you stop, you know where you're going to stop every night. It's the same thing. I had a service carry my luggage because I didn't have Roberto to depend on. And it's the same thing. You meet people who love to hike, and it's just such a pleasant experience that it's challenging, though. It really is. And I ends up in a place called Robin Hood Bay. So it's so British. And you're walking along, and then it starts to rain and pour, and you meet people, go, wonderful day for a walk, and it's like awful, but I enjoyed the El Camino a little more just because it was more spiritual in the sense that you end up at a cathedral, but and there's so much history there. The Coast to Coast is a little, it's not the same weather, but it's a nice challenge, and it's so pretty.
Well, and the West Coast Canadian in me said, yeah, days of rain continuously. So what?
Well, I'm a Californian, so, it's something to get used to.
Yeah, one of my best friends lives down there, and she looks at me. We talk every week, and I'm all bundled up and grumpy. She's in her spaghetti straps. Ah, dear. Okay, I have a saying that for me is a joke, and it is, when I rule the world, things will be different.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to say that, you must have some pretty tangible thoughts, though. Is there any you want to share that you can share? If you ruled the world.
That's so hard. I guess somebody asked me, and this is a little easier question. Someone asked me if there's one huge thing I could change.
Okay.
I'm more of a focused.
Yep.
The thing I would change is I would get rid of greed. If I had that magic wand and could change one thing, I would take that out of us. And that, I think, would change the world. I think we would want we'd have less expectations for material things. We'd have less, we would demand less. We'd be less hard on the resources. There's just so much that goes along when you don't have that instinct, that drive, which greed is, even on a small level. So that would be my magic wish.
That's a great one, because when you look at any of the problems in the world today, it's greed of one sort or another, whether it's monetary, political, religious, environmental, just everything. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to make note of that, because when I rule the world, I'm hiring you as the greed eliminator.
It'd be interesting to see how things would shake out. How quickly things would evolve differently
with a couple of mid-aged women at the helm.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, you've had a pretty amazing life. I shouldn't do that right in front of my microphone. You've had a pretty amazing life to date. What's next?
Well, I'm writing a sequel to my book. Okay. I wrote the book during COVID because I was really worried that at the end of COVID, I wouldn't have done anything, and it was just so nice to have that time and as for all those writers out there or wannabe writers, I just started an hour a day. It was like exercising, like swimming or running. It's like I started small and I didn't tire myself out. So I put together stories that I really thought were important. And then since everybody else was home during COVID, they helped me out. They read it and they said, this is funny. This is not funny. I don't like that story. It was really nice to help me out. So I wrote that book and I got it published about 8 months ago. Now I'm writing the sequel because in the first book, there's sort of a lesson learned in every chapter. And it's not the lessons, it's not an in your face lesson. It's an example of what I experienced when I was overseas. So my whole goal in writing the first book was to highlight issues that you're going to face when you're working overseas that you don't expect. Okay. Like I had a toxic boss. I mean, when you're over trying to do good and improve the world and alleviate poverty, the last thing you think is you're going to get some guy who's, rude and belittling. When I got attacked in Bangladesh, that's a lesson learned. I was told things were dangerous. I didn't listen. That was my bad. And that goes through the whole, the rest of the book. There's always like some gem that you should be able to take away for it. I don't tell you how to think. I mean, I leave a lot of things open, just like I tee up these issues. And then as a young person, and a lot of people who buy my book are young diplomats and young folks going into international development. So I'm writing the sequel because, as it turns out, I've got a few more lessons to pass along. And so I'm trying to crank that out about 75, 80% through. And what I got to do after that, I think I'd like to write a novel. I'm kind of hooked by the writing bug. And it's fun. When I first published the book, somebody said, "Oh my God, you're an author?" And I corrected them. I'm like, "Well, no, I'm a person who wrote a book." Which I thought was different, I didn't talk about the craft of writing but I learned that I really liked it. And so if I can get the second book done, and then all my stories will be complete, that will be it. And then if I could write a novel, I really would like to.
I was going to just follow up with that question about, like when you were talking about the lessons learned, is, are these sort of for women in these countries? But it sounds like this is an everybody book. If this particular lesson doesn't apply to you, not a problem, because in the next chapter, this one could well apply to you, or give you food for thought, shall we say.
Right. Because the things that I talk about are things that you don't have to be overseas to deal with. It's just,
good point.
Basic. And in one chapter, after my father died, I didn't take care of my mental health. My approach to his death was, well, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to work through it. And that didn't work out for me. I got very, very nervous and I didn't do the job as well as I should have. And that chapter, I hope the takeaway is you got to be kind to yourself. If you're struggling, you got to take care of yourself first, because then you can't take care of anybody else. So that's a lesson for everybody, that you don't have to be overseas and you don't have to be female. So yeah, that it has a pretty broad appeal. And of course, then there's the love interest. Everybody likes that. I mean, there are 8 chapters, 8 countries. And the number one question I get is, what happened to the boyfriend? Which is kind of irksome.
Well, you see, and I actually had the thought of, I am not going to ask what happened to the boyfriend. I had that thought. Uh-huh. Do you still get headhunted?
I do, but I'm 65. And so, you know what? It's like when you turn a certain age in development, it's like they put you on a list. I really believe that. But it's okay, because it was bothersome at first, but I'm ready to let go, because there is a new generation of people who want to do this, who are enthusiastic. Hopefully now and again, they'll pick me up for a project. I'd love to do one. I get interviewed every so often. We'll get back to you. So there might be another couple of projects in my future, but I kind of like this third chapter of my life that now I'm, it's like I can go into a couple bookstores and see my book. That's really fun.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah, that'd be cool. I'm just going to ask this as one quick question. If you are finding yourself sometimes put on the shelf, is that an age thing or a gender thing? An age and gender thing?
I think it's an age and gender thing. I've talked to people about it, and the men who I worked with who are older with me said the same thing, that after 60, 62, they were no longer sought after. But I think it is tougher for women.
Yeah.
I do. In fact, the women, they say statistically there are more women in international development and diplomacy than men. And I suppose that's true, but I don't think that they're in the key jobs. All of my chief of parties, and that's like the boss of the project, they were all men, always. And so they brought in a lot of women on the jobs that the men didn't want to do. Oh my God, I hope I don't get blowback on this, but it's true. There are a lot more women in Afghanistan and Iraq than you expected because the men wouldn't go. And they filled those slots with women like me. But yeah, I do think it's a gender thing. And it's disappointing because I don't think I look old. I don't feel old. I'm still take care of myself. But, you can see from my resume.
Well, and the thing is what matters is how old your brain is. And it sounds like, oh my God, like your brain is well stocked with great inventory.
Well, yeah, at least about me.
Well, and I'll join you on the blowback train because when you were saying about more women, my one thought is, yeah, they want the women because the women will get things done. So we'll see how much hate mail either one of us get.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. A very practical approach. I don't know, but there are a lot of good men out there. A lot of hard workers. So yeah, I don't want any nasty grams.
No, we love them all and we appreciate them. And at this stage of my conversation, I will often ask my guests if there is anything they want mid-age women, because our Boomer Women podcast, mid-age women to know or to think about. But I think with your story, maybe I should ask if there's anything you want the world to think about besides greed. We've already gone over greed, and that's a great one.
And I wouldn't have had this. I wouldn't have had this response 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But today, I would say I think we all have to remind ourselves that we're all in this together, and that it is okay. I mean, I get these messages on my Facebook feed about, it's going to be another great day and, be kind to people. I think that those are things that I scroll through slower and slower. I need those reminders that we are all dealing with big issues. And yes, it's important to be kind. And yes, be open to caring for each other more than just ourselves individually, not if that makes sense. It's just so important right now. I was walking down the street the other day and I took care of my parents when they were elderly, at least my mom. And you could just get in the habit when you see someone sitting down by themselves on a brick wall, I asked them if they're okay. Mm-hmm. And I asked, there's a lady just sitting there and staring off into space. And I go, are you all right? And she goes, oh my God, thanks for asking. She goes, I'm not all right. I've got stuff going on. I do. And she goes, but the fact that one person stopped long enough to say and be interested in me has made all the difference. But then I had to hear 30 minutes of how her life was going the wrong way. But okay, I shouldn't have put that part in there. But it's so true. Like if you're sitting there, it would be nice to have someone just say, "You're all right." Yeah. So is that helpful? Is that a good answer?
No, that's a great answer. And I am going to leave in your little aside because it's true. I mean, let's turn the other side of the coin. Is how often do you say, "Hey, how you doing?" And you could be having the day from hell and you're going to say, "Hey, I'm fine," because you don't want to go into that big, long story. And yet, maybe we would pay more attention. And I guess I can't remember just what you said now, but it was like, oh, you didn't say like, are you
all right?
Yeah, that's right. Are you okay? Because yeah, we're all okay. But you said, are you all right? And to me, that was just a little bit more sensitive and thoughtful.
That's me, sensitive and thoughtful.
Oh, well, there you go. Yay.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No, I'm just thinking the longer I talk to you, is like, I want to talk to this woman again. Okay, so your book. Before you tell our listeners about it, let me read the first page of the Amazon summary.
Okay.
getting roughed up by Islamic fundamentalists, the weekly feline sex fest in Kyiv, bribing Russian police to avoid jail in Moscow, sheltering under the sink with the lizards when the ammo dump exploded in Zuba, automatic weapon training in Indiana, and that ill-fated morning bike ride in Kabul. It was a great job.
It was a great job.
So tell our listeners, I mean, you've touched on a couple of those stories, but tell our listeners about the book. What's the name of it?
The name is Bike Riding in Kabul, and I get a lot of pushback on the title. Either you love it or you hate it, because I think that the concern is that they think that it's all about Afghanistan. It's not. There's 2 chapters on Afghanistan, but the fact that I was such a lunatic that I would actually be talked into taking a bike ride in downtown Kabul in 2005, this was a crazy adventure, which I never did again. But it talks about my time overseas from 2002 until 2010. And the countries included are Kosovo, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Moscow, which is Russian Federation, Afghanistan, Southern Sudan, Rwanda, and Afghanistan again. And I think I mature over the book. I learn a lot, but because a lot of times I was a single woman, I mean, Roberto and I ping-ponged around the world, but a lot of times I was by myself. And I find that women by themselves are more approachable, than if you're with a couple. And so I had a lot of interesting experiences. People talked to me, people came up to me. I dealt with local staff, I dealt with ministers, and I really came away with something I wanted to put in print. The other thing is that it does track my father's demise in Alzheimer's, which is everybody, it seems like so many people are dealing with the same issue now. And the bottom line, it is not a fun thing at all. This idea that there's this notebook. I remember that there was a movie and they had Gina Rollins and she always looked fabulous. She just was forgetful. That was not our experience with Alzheimer's. It was a long, difficult thing. And I talk about that a little bit in the book, because he got worse and worse every year. So even though you're overseas and even though you're having a pretty interesting job, you still have to deal with the stuff at home. And so that's part of the book as well.
Personal question, just because we do get into dementias and elderly. Did you have guilt about not being able to be more present for him?
Well, this is part of the next book, but he extracted from me a promise when he was sharp that when my mom needed it, I would come home, basically. And the way he said it's like, it would give me peace of mind if you would promise me that you'll, take care of her. She won't need financial stuff, but when she needs a little more help. And I'm like, sure, no problem, Dad. It's like, figuring I'd never have to make good on the debt. And then I did. And so when she was in trouble, I came back and I lived in San Jose for 2.5 years with her. And so I paid him back.
And was that after he had passed?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
I thought I paid him. Let's put it this way. When she died, I had no guilt. I took her to lunch every day. I rolled her around in wheelchairs. I did everything I possibly could for her. And then when she died, it was like, okay, I did my duty.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to get sort of heavy there. It's just that sometimes the discussion is, as working mid-age women, we have guilt if there's children and we have guilt if there's parents. So, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Sure. I totally understand. But that, that's part of life now. And it was a long slog. I remember it's like years before they got it. I mean, they were diagnosed with it. Or I guess my dad just had it. And somebody said, that's going to be 8 to 10 years of heartbreak. And that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. It's, where do we find the book?
You can get on Amazon, and I know people don't like Amazon for a number of good reasons, but you can order from Amazon. Barnes and Noble has it. There's a couple of bookstores in Washington, D.C. that have it, but for the most part, it's an indie. Oh, and I can brag a little bit. It's won 2 Fire Bird Awards for Best New Nonfiction and Best Memoir, I think. And then it just recently won a Nautilus Award, which is really kind of a prestigious award. It was a silver in travel memoirs. So I think I'm pretty hot stuff right now.
Yeah, and I apologize because in my notes I have something about the book won a few awards.
It did, and that it was really, really fun. It made I was happy with the book even without those awards, but that's a little bit of validation.
No, for
and
sure.
You can throw that out there every so often.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I will just add that on numerous occasions, I have gone into a local bookstore and said, I want this book, please bring it in. So for those people who don't like ordering online or don't like Amazon or whatever, give that a try. I'm sure they'll find it for you.
They'll do that for you. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I will put the Amazon link in the show notes because we want to make sure. I might just go get it on Kindle right now and then go order the real thing.
The way these things work out these days, you can also get it on Walmart's website. You can get it on Books A Million. There's all those websites are sort of interconnected some way. Barnes and Noble is separate from Amazon, of course, but there's connection between Barnes and Noble and Walmart. So you never expect these things. So every so often, I was looking through a Walmart website, my book came up.
And what were you looking for on that Walmart website?
Gosh, I can't remember. I was so stunned to see my book. I can't remember.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Listeners, if you have thoughts on today's show, please talk to us. Leave comments where you're listening, or if you're listening at the Boomer Woman's podcast at boomwithabang.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and talk to us there. Leave stars and reviews where you can. They help us grow. Share this episode. Jamie's story is worth listening to again and again and again. And I mean, we only heard part of it today. And with all due respect to your third book, my notes, I say, who needs fiction?
What a nice thing to say.
Jamie Bowman, thank you so much for being my guest today and sharing just even part of your amazing story with us.
Thanks, Agnes. It was a total pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.
You too now.